Hello all, this is Barbara Mann from Your Empowered You, and welcome to our short video on how to effectively manage workplace change. So one thing is for certain, things change. Whether it's in the workplace or in life, things will always change. So in this short video, we're going to talk about why we struggle with change, what are a few components of workplace change management, and then finally, how to effectively manage change. So why do we struggle with change? People like their comfort zones. We like our comfort zones. We like to know what is familiar to us, what's predictable for us, and like staying, what's comfortable. We don't like the fear of the unknown. Now, some people really dig it. Most of us, though, have a fear of the unknown, especially if it's not communicated well, which we'll talk a lot about communication. In the workplace, sometimes, when you're doing a change, it's going to take longer to do your work. So we want to revert back to the fastest way, which is the old way. It's faster to do it the old way. I'm sure you've heard that a million times. That's what a lot of people do. They revert back again to familiarity, predictability. And then finally, we struggle with change is because we don't have really the buy-in. We're unclear about what is that change? Why are we doing this? What's the impact to me? And if you don't understand those components of change, you're not going to have that buy-in. And so you're going to hear me talk a lot about the plan and communication because that's very, very important on change management. So what are a few change management components? It's really understanding how change impacts people. We talked about why we struggle with it, but really understanding, that change with different types of people. So you're going to have people who are early adopters who embrace this change. They're loving it. You're going to have, on the other end of the spectrum, people who are your resistors. You're going to have vocal resistors. You're going to have silent resistors. So who are those people? And then everybody obviously in between. So understanding how this is impacting each of the team members, whether it's managers or individual contributors. Understanding that people, when they get stressed, they want to revert back to the comfort zone, to what's familiar, to what works for them, what they're the expert in. They're going to revert back to that. So understanding that a lot of people are going to go backwards, just flat out, that's what they're going to do. So being prepared on how to overcome that and address it is important. You got to have a plan. That is darn important. What's the change? Why are we changing it? What are the benefits? And finally, what is that impact to the staff? People are going to want to know, how is this impacting me? As part of that plan, you've got to have a strong communication plan at all levels of the organization. Over communication on change, especially if it's a big one, is important. You cannot have over communication on a huge change. Under communication, the change will derail. And then finally, you got to have a strong training plan. So if this is a big change that involves training, what does that training plan look like? So these are all the things that happen really before you start rolling out any kind of change. You're understanding all this big plan. You're prepping the team, you're rolling out the communication. What is this going to look like? Here's what the training is. So you're preparing people for the change. So they're digesting it. And then finally, another component of change management is, when are you following up with your staff? Is it daily? Is it weekly? Is it monthly? And who is following up? So understanding that the follow-up is obviously very, very important. I can tell you some of the struggles I've seen, especially with newer managers, is that say they'll roll out a change and they just expect people to embrace it, but they don't follow up and they wonder why, Johnny isn't incorporating something. It's because you need to follow up and make sure that, Johnny isn't struggling with it, because he might be, right? And you might be stressed. So understanding, your staff is obviously extremely critical. So effectively managing the change, it really comes down to a couple of things: plan and communication. So on the plan, it's got to be clear and concise. The more clear and the more concise that you can communicate this plan, the better it's going to be. Obviously, overcomplicating something is not a good idea. It must be effectively communicated at all levels of the organization. Usually the change is cascaded down. So you go from your C execs to your senior management, to your middle management, to individual contributors, and it cascades all the way down so that everybody is clear. Has to address, the plan must address what is the change? Why are we doing this? People want to understand why are we doing this and not just changing willy-nilly. What are the benefits, maybe to the organization, to the customers, to the employees? What are the benefits? What's the impact to every level of the organization? What's the training plan look like? There must be some sort of tool, a feedback loop. So whether it is a verbal feedback tool where your managers are asking, how's it going? Whether it's an electronic feedback tool, is there a way to deliver feedback? You have to obtain feedback when you're dealing with change. And making sure that you follow up regularly. As managers, this is really, really important. Until everybody has jumped and made this change, that follow-up is critical. And make sure it's regular. If it has to be daily, that's great. Some changes may be an hourly thing, depending on what your change looks like. So making sure that you follow up regularly is imperative. Do you need a measurement to measure your progress? Is there some sort of tool that's needed to measure the progress of your change? Again, you want to have that in place before you start rolling out your plan. Make sure that once it's rolled out and maybe you're obtaining the feedback from your staff, if you need to modify it, modify it. But communicate to your staff every step of the way. If you're modifying something, that communication is imperative. You can't over-communicate when you're talking about a big change. Make sure you're reinforcing that what the change should look like. You got to keep reinforcing it. Again, this is a lot about, you roll out the change, people are happy, but then they start maybe reverting back. You're reinforcing it. You're leading people through to the other side until that new change becomes the new habit. Have some sort of system in place for recognizing and rewarding people who are embracing this change, who can potentially help others, things of that nature. But recognizing people and rewarding them is fantastic. And then obviously, every level of the organization has to model the desired change, whatever that looks like. So nobody likes it if someone says, oh, okay, yeah, this is what the change looks like, and then you don't model it. You're not going to have the buy-in, right? So you've got to model the desired change. So as managers, understanding the impact to the people, and this is all level of managers. So your C execs, they may roll out a change. Well, your resistors might be the directors. It may be your branch managers. So I'm not just talking about, resistors and all that being individual contributors. Your managers may be resistors. So understanding your people at all levels of the organization is really, really important. And as managers at any level, you got to understand the change and you got to own it. Now, as a manager, do you like all the changes that are incorporated? No, you're not going to like every single one, but what definitely you need to do if you're a good manager is you got to understand why we're doing this and you got to own it. Avoid being the puppet and just saying, well, management's making us do this. I don't really know why. I don't really like it, but we got to do it. You just lost all credibility and your change management is going to go down the tubes. As managers, follow up regularly with the group. With your group or your individual meetings. So whatever that looks like, but you really want to obtain honest and transparent feedback. And you want to communicate honestly and transparently with them. As managers, understand your early adopters and understand your resistors. Those verbal resistors, you much would rather have a verbal resistor because at least you know what their deal is. The quiet ones, you don't necessarily know if they're a resistor because they're quiet. So really make sure that you have that great relationship where you're able to understand who's struggling with it, who's embracing it. Help your team when they are stressed. If you're rolling out a big change, most likely that team is not going to, necessarily dig it day one. They may be stressed. So lead your team through that time of stress. And be disciplined. So keep making sure that everybody is going forward on this change. That requires a lot of upfront work by a manager, and getting that feedback, helping your people through. Don't just assume that they're all embracing it, that they know what the change is. You got to be disciplined and circle back, communicate, and reward the behavior. You reward it, recognize it, tell success stories. And then finally, I'm going to say this a lot, communicate. You cannot over communicate if you're talking about a big change. People will understand, okay, I get it. Okay, fine, that's good. But if you under communicate, that's when things sort of go south. Understand that when people are stressed, we've talked about this, they're going to revert back. They want to revert back. A lot of times when people make a change, the first week is, it's all great and everything, but when they start getting stressed and maybe the workload's increased, maybe someone called in sick, they want to revert back then to what's comfortable because it's faster. Okay, and obviously as you keep reinforcing this and getting feedback, change will get easier until it forms a new habit and is running itself. You don't want to stop the follow-up until it becomes the new habit. And if you have, your early sort of adopters and others who are embracing the change, make sure everyone's helping one another. That is a strong team when everyone's helping each other through this change. That is a great engaged team. So let's wrap this up in a bow. So the things that we've talked about, the key points on change management is, you got to have a plan. You got to understand that impact of people. People don't inherently like change. So understand the impact to all of the people in the organization at all the levels. Be very clear on explaining what's the change, why is the change, what are the benefits, and what is the impact. Explaining that is very important well before the change occurs if you can. Reward the desired behavior. There's some people who are going to be great at embracing it, so you want to make sure that obviously you recognize it and reward it. And tell success stories. Everyone loves hearing success stories and good stuff. It gains your momentum. So tell those success stories. Reiterate, obtain feedback, have follow-up until you know that everybody has comfortably made the change. And then finally, what we talked about and hopefully stressed is you want to communicate at every stage of the change. Before the change, making sure they understand the plans and the whys and all that, and what the training plan is going to look like and the impact. Communicate when the change rolls out. You're communicating after the change is rolled out, and then getting the feedback and making tweaks. Communicate. Once you know that everybody has taken that leap of faith and it becomes their new habit, then you know that you've had a great change management system in place. So I hope you've all enjoyed our short video on how to manage workplace change. I thank you for attending, and for additional resources or to schedule a session with me, please visit my website at www.youремpoweredyou.com. You can email me at bman@youремpoweredyou.com, or you can give me a call at 916-633-2555. And I thank you very much and have a very empowered day. Thank you.